Well, as we saw in that clip, it gives the landing gear a pretty good shaking. If you notice, that tire was moving back and forth 12 to 15 degrees in that slow motion shot. And that puts a lot of stress on everything. Sometimes if you've had the shimmy a long time, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because some of the damage done by the shimmy original cause invariably is something like the shimmy dampener. And this is usually a quick fix that people go to service the shimmy dampener. Sometimes that doesn't do it because the mounting on the shimmy dampener has too much play and wiggle, and you need to rebush that. One of the other culprits is the tire and tube. Now, this is the tire that was on the airplane. It is very close to new. It's in excellent shape, but it's been on the airplane probably less than 100 hours, or maybe a little more. It still has most of the little rubber nibs on it. It looks to be a tire in excellent shape. But if you think about that picture you just saw, this tire spent, every time it shimmied, it spent part of its life scuffing at an angle of 12 to 15 degrees to the right, immediately scuffing to the left. And this causes uneven wear on the tire. And the tire itself can be the cause of future shimmies. Inner tube is another issue. And I'm a shade tree mechanic. If you're a real mechanic, you probably ought to leave this right now, because I'm strictly an amateur. But one of the recommendations, and I tried it, I blew this tube up to just about 4 pounds. And I blew the new one up to about 4 pounds. Now, if you look at this tube, it's excellent. It's got no cracks, no damage around the stem. Everything looks excellent on this. And in the past, I would shrug off suggestions to replace the tube. If I had a tube that looked this good, I thought there was no problem putting it back in. Well, when I got the new tube and compared them, when I inflated them both to 4 pounds, this one was 15 to 20% larger than the new tube, meaning it was 15-20% bigger than it should have been inside the tire. And that can cause a number of problems. The obvious would be a wrinkle, where it could cause a flat. But the other is this tube is stretched and it doesn't fill evenly like a new tube would. So that could also be part of the problem. So you take a ground up limit. You probably watched on YouTube, there's several good videos on replacing your torque links and how to service them and how to look for a shimmy. And I'm not going to go over all of that information, but I am going to cover one area they seem to always skip, and that is the removal of the bushings. These bushings, which are inside all of the moving parts of your torque links. The problem with these bushings is they're installed this way, one up against the other, inside. So there is really no easy way to pull them out. And I went through different sources looking for a little help on the subject. And let's see. Yes, I had a question and answer section from McFarland Aviation. Gave some guidance to at least a starting point of where one might be able to figure out with hand tools how to remove this. Well, their initial suggestion, and from then on I was kind of on my own, but the initial suggestion was why the bushings are still inside the unit, to use a thread cutter and thread inside. Well, to get a good strong connection, you have to drill inside the bushing a little bit, and to drill it for a 7/16 by 20 bolt. By 20 because that's a coarse thread that's going to have good holding power. In this case, used a 25/64 drill while it was still in the unit, and put in my vise and drilled it out to that diameter, and then used a simple cheap die set with a 7/16 by 20 die, and cut the thread in. Also putting the unit in my vise and cutting the thread. Well, that got me to the first step. While it was inside the unit here, I now had one side threaded right inside the torque link itself. And now I had a way to grab on or do something with that bolt. Well, any efforts to pull that bushing out with simple hand tools was out of the question. When I talked to a friend of mine, A&P, he said, you don't want to pull it out, you want to push it out. And following his lead, while the torque links were still in here, I had the bolt there, and then I had a bolt small enough to go inside the bushings and up against the other bolt. And then I put that into the vise, and on the opposite side where you're going to push the first bushing out, you use a large socket that is big enough to completely cover this area, and yet small enough to allow the head of the bushing, when it's being pushed out, to go inside the unit while you're holding it. You do that inside the vise by cranking it down. Removing it on the first turn, I found it took a little extra pull than just my vise handle, and I had to use a short piece of pipe with a little bit of extra leverage, and then it worked out fine. Much to my surprise, the 4 bushings came out pretty quick. I got lucky with the second side of the bushing, with 1 bushing in there, and just a plain bushing remaining inside the unit now. We had the one pushed out. How did we get that one out? Well, I got lucky. I had this little, I think it's a, what is it, a 7/16? No, a small socket anyway, 1/4-inch drive socket, that just happened to fit in here nicely, that had the same circumference exactly as the bushing. So again, it became a matter of pushing. This went in here until it hit the that, and then I used the large so that bushing could be pressed out, cranked it in with the vise, and pushed the second bushing out. So that went pretty smoothly. In a few minutes, we'll go over with hand tools again and without a press, how can you insert the new bushings? We'll cover that in a minute. Now, one of the steps we didn't cover in the beginning to make life a little easier when it comes to removing the bushings, following a suggestion again that I found online, I think it was from McFarlane, was to heat these up not more than 350 degrees. And that's because the aluminum expands much faster than the steel bushing does. So this is a game of millimeters when you're trying to force these out with very tight tolerance. The other thing I did ahead of time is I removed the oil fittings, grease fittings, beforehand. And after I got the bushings in, I made sure that, after I got the bushings out, I made sure I cleaned these out. It was very dry, and then put some light lubricant in there, And I will put grease in them prior to putting the bushings in there to help them seat correctly. But you want to make sure you don't have any moisture, and you want to make sure the internal housing is very clean all the way through and polished, so you don't have any corrosion on the surface of the collar on the inside to put your new bushing on. And of course, while you're at it, again, I think McFarland and many aircraft part places offer the McFarland kit, and you can get the kit in different trims. Some gives you everything except the bushings. Some give you all of the parts. You have different levels you can order. Some of the parts you may have on hand. Back here we use basic hardware. These are AN4 bolts that mount back here, and they're AN4 31s with drilled bolts, obviously, and the appropriate hardware that goes on those. The spacers you'll either have to buy individually or in the kit, and some of the kits don't come with the spacers because a lot of times they're not an issue. But they can be. Again, in this case, where there were several episodes of shimmy, these bolts are not only worn and shiny in spots, but I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but they're actually not true anymore. So it's probably not running true on the inside, so I am replacing the bolts and the spacers along with the bushings, and that is probably a good choice to go. The one area you will not have easy access to for hardware, that it's not general hardware, is where the torque links mount in the rear. The upper torque link actually has bushings too. They can be replaced. In this case they were not. They showed no signs of wear. They're doing pretty well. But the close tolerance bolt on the inside that you're going to replace is a specific bolt. In this case for a Cessna 150, and I think it's the same for most of the 100 series Cessnas, is a NAS 464-3-22. So you have to have that specific bolt. The kit will give you that bolt in no matter which level kit you buy, I believe. So you want to have your parts lined up ahead of time rather than having to sit around and wait for them to arrive. The other issue, beside heating these up before trying to remove the bushings, quite the opposite is true when you go to install them. Again, it's a game of tolerances. You're going to be driving those into your torque links or pressing them into your torque links. You can save some heartache. Again, they recommend putting these in a freezer for up to 48 hours ahead of time, or at least 24. A lot of them get super cold, and that will speed up the process a little bit, beside a small layer of grease on the outside of these, and of course greasing a little grease on the inside before you try to install the new ones. Well, right now, fresh out of the freezer, one bushing. I've already taken the one side of the torque link and placed it in my vise, padded a little bit so I don't beat it up, and I've lined it. I usually use Lubriplate, but I have that out at the hanger, so I used synthetic high temperature grease. And I got to do the same thing with this very cold bushing, and I'm going to grease the sides of it on the outside to have it ready to go. And now my mounting. I simply have a heavy duty bolt, extra washers so I don't run out of thread when I seat it, and one washer on the inside that has the same diameter as this. The bushing goes down on there. Now this is a first for me too, so let's hope it works out okay. I might have put too many washers because I don't have a lot of room. probably have to take a couple of these extra washers off the other end so I get a little more thread. That's what happens when you don't practice first, I guess. Bushing goes back on. Goes through here. Now we have enough thread. Well, maybe not quite. Yep, starting to go in there. Simply tighten up the bolts. Might help if I adjust this one properly. Don't have much thread started here, so it might take a little bit. Kind of watch your bushing as it goes in. And it looks like the bushing's going in very nicely. The angle's not the best for you to see, but as I tighten this bolt and this bolt, it's just pulling the bushing right into the torque link. Even this short stubby is enough. I brought a half out in case it was going to be stubborn, but it goes very easy this way. You could probably do it in your hand instead of a vise if you wanted to. Well, I'm going to need a little deeper socket. Simply I'll switch ends here and we'll be good to go, because the bolt's coming through. So and we'll just take that holder out of there now. We should have that bushing seated nicely. I'll show you in just one moment here. As soon as we loosen this guy up. Like I said, I'm a shade tree mechanic, not much of a mechanic at all. But we have this out now. Now this bolt is big enough to go completely through the other bushing, so there'll be no problem pulling the other bushing in. And then you see your bushing's in nice and flush, no problem at all. You can see it pressed out a little grease, so you know it's got a grease lining on the inside. And then you simply reverse it and do it on two. I think having that bushing in the freezer for a couple days worked out well and helped it go in easy. Even this short little stubby was enough to snug up that bolt to slide that in there with no trouble. Just initially lining it up. And that's it. That's how you install your bushings. Well, that kind of wraps it up for our shade tree mechanic lesson for today. Why I continue with that, that's all it is, a close look at it. You can see I've got the bushing greased and the bolt with some extra washers for spacing. Going to slide it through here. And with that, I'll bid you adieu and good luck with your project. Hopefully my shimmy shake dance will be over when I get done, and I wish you happy flying. Thanks for watching.